My oblivious bystander strategy was running thin. Even with the darkness that could conceal the enemy from my gaze and all of my efforts to provide cover, we were in danger. Our strongest hope was that Carousel had other plans for us. I had watched my other uses of oblivious bystander on the red wallpaper before using director's monitor. Usually, Carousel used 10 or so seconds of the footage it shot. Just enough to show me at risk, and then it would cut to something else. By the time the camera came back to me, the threat was practically gone. The exception was the time I used eating cereal as cover against ranger danger. Carousel showed almost that whole scene combined with the murder I was ignoring. I looked like a lucky idiot. The question was, when would we go off screen? When would our pursuer lose interest? I pictured the scene in my mind, trying to will it into reality. I rushed to check on Antoine. The monster watches from afar, and cut. The camera goes back to Isaac or Bobby or Dina. But there was no cut. It was only then that I remembered that I was in a storyline with outsiders and a wallflower. They were not really scene stealers. Dina was probably using her trope to stay off screen. I doubted Isaac was doing anything too interesting as a comedian, and Constance was just researching. Antoine and I were probably the most interesting characters at that moment. The plot was not moving forward anywhere else. The monster was behind us by 20 yards or so. Surely that meant it wasn't about to go in for an attack. We weren't even next on the priority list. Why continue to watch us if it wasn't going to attack? As I pondered all of this, my heart nearly beating out of my chest, my muscles sore from carrying much of Antoine's weight, something changed. A message appeared on the red wallpaper. Straight downhill past the street. Bunch of dead people. Actual bodies, not ghosts. Off screen the whole time. Watching from the shadows. Son is scared. Dina. Dina had the ability to post messages for her allies on the red wallpaper with her pen pal trope. The only catch was that the messages were tied to a specific location. This was the first time she had used it to my knowledge. I recognized this location as the place we had split up. It made sense she had chosen that spot. I couldn't go check out the bodies she was talking about. It would be hard to justify that change in direction. Plus, that was a hard right turn that would inevitably lead to me seeing the monster in the darkness behind us. We had to keep going uphill. Off screen. Finally. As we continued walking, I could still catch glimpses of something behind us in the corner of my eye. I still heard the occasional laugh over my music. Was it just going to stick around even without the camera? The chase scene status wasn't even lit because oblivious bystander prevented that. Was this thing just watching us out of curiosity? For 5 minutes it kept watching us as we climbed upward. We kept up the ruse of me helping Antoine the whole time just in case, but I got this feeling that oblivious bystander had deactivated long ago. We should have been safe. And then the creature quickened its pace. It was running behind us. With Antoine hobbled and me carrying him, we weren't going to be able to outrun it. That didn't actually matter. It ran past us. Right past us, practically nudging me out of the way as it went. What I saw was difficult to describe. It was the type of thing only possible in dreams. It was a man, a ghost to be more precise. He was dressed in a blue button-up shirt and a yellow neon vest. He wore a tool belt. He was probably in his early 30s, slightly overweight, dark hair, unshaven. He was an electrician to be more exact if the lightning-shaped burns on his face, neck, and shirt meant what I thought they meant. He turned his head to me as he passed. The man himself looked confused, lost. It almost looked like he wanted to ask me a question. I felt an aura as he passed that chilled my blood. Black thread wound around and through the man's skin all over. It looked like he had been in some sort of industrial sewing machine accident. Behind him, there was something. I couldn't describe it any better than that. There was a dark, blurry figure. I felt like I could see more if I just craned my neck, but it was impossible. This guy passed me and the figure still looked like he was standing behind the electrician. The logic made no sense. A woman's hand stuck out from behind the man as he passed me and waved. Then another arm shot out, again, waving. The arms were dead. That was scary enough, even in the moonlight they looked pale. That wasn't the thing that scared me though. I hadn't been able to see the poster for the ghost who had waved at me when I played the 10-second game. I didn't know if that was a trope effect or if I just didn't see them clearly enough. I saw these three on the red wallpaper though. The electrician was a wandering spirit like JT Guzman had been. Same tropes. I didn't catch his name because I was distracted. The first arm was from a woman named Marla. She was called a presence on the red wallpaper. Marla Keen, presence. Plot armor, 7. Underscore 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 underscore. Tropes. Unfinished business. This entity didn't manage to accomplish something in life and now lingers. Ambient energy. This entity serves as a spiritual battery for other entities. Peer pressure. This entity may not be aggressive, but will join with other entities as part of a collective. Her tropes were not even close to being the worst part. One detail I often schemed over when analyzing enemies was the poster itself. I mostly focused on the nameplate underneath, which often contained a description of what the enemy was. The poster itself was usually not that informative because most of its text was usually something like "so and so is the bad guy" in the horror movie title. It just wasn't the information I usually needed because the nameplate had all the important stuff like plot armor. Plus, the smaller trope posters usually took most of my attention. Whatever the case, the poster was usually not that important other than for getting a better look at the enemy. Marla's poster showed her floating in the shadows behind a door in an old house at night. Spooky. Not important. But the text itself was important. Marla Keen is a presence in the fixer-upper. I stopped and reread it. The fixer-upper? The other arm didn't belong to Marla. It belonged to someone called Newscaster, Dusty. I didn't see his tropes. I wasn't looking at them. I saw an image of him on fire. Newscaster, Dusty, is a haunting vision in They Never Sleep. Antoine and I stopped in our tracks and watched as the electrician and the many entities behind him continued up the path. I never saw the shadowy figure on the red wallpaper. It was shielded somehow. Perhaps that was why it hid behind things. When it was out of view, I asked Antoine, "Did you see that?" "That's the thing that killed Kimberly," he said. "It had 100 arms. Killed Cassie too." "Remotely," I said. Antoine drew a deep breath. "It could have killed me. It didn't. Maybe because of plot armor, I don't know. It just played with me. It broke my leg. Snapped it in half on screen, and one of the ghosts told me I wasn't going to walk that off. That was worrying." Antoine's walk it off trope would allow him to recover from his hobbled status, but that wasn't going to work if the audience saw it get visibly shattered. "It can see our tropes," I said. Antoine nodded. "That's what I figure." "Did you look at the ghosts on the red wallpaper?" I asked. He shrugged. "Yeah, what?" Antoine didn't have an inside trope that would make examining enemies on the red wallpaper a priority. He hadn't noticed what I did. "Not all of the ghosts are from this movie," I said. "They're from different storylines." "Yeah. Different tropes and everything. Different types of movie ghosts altogether." That was a big deal. I had never seen an enemy in the wrong storyline. Even the Avenging Dead had said they were from Permanent Vacancy, even though they were clearly not a part of the original storyline. "What does that tell us?" he asked. "All I have are theories," I said. He digested what we had just discussed. "You saw Dina's note?" he asked. I nodded. "There's a lot going on here," he said. We started making our way further uphill in the direction the monster had gone. Our characters wouldn't know it had gone that way or even that it had been following us. We had no choice but to pretend. One benefit of being off-screen was that we didn't have to be so careful. Antoine was holding back before. Without having to keep oblivious bystander active, we made our way up the hill much faster. "I'm glad to have grit," he said. "I barely feel my leg right now." Grit could help you not feel pain. Antoine also had a tendency to lie about his pain. "Maybe I should get some," I said. I had plenty of experience with getting hurt. After we had been going for a while, he said, "Thanks for rescuing me." "No problem," I said. I was barely able to restrain myself from saying "I told you so." I had listed the virtues of the strategy numerous times. I was just glad Antoine knew what to do when I showed up. "This is not designed for new players," he said. "Nope." We moved forward as fast as possible until eventually, I heard a scream ahead. We were still off-screen. We sped up as much as possible. Antoine had lost his bat. There wasn't much we could do to help if we got there, but still, we had to hurry. That sounded like Isaac, Antoine said. The newbies are not off to a fun start, are they? We ran forward until we burst forth from the tree line at the top of the hill. I could see the hotel suite again. We were too late. The ghost of Cassie stood near the open window of the house. She was crying for her brother, begging for help from the rest of us. She was a player still and had both of her player tropes, but she was dead and infected on the red wallpaper. She had additional enemy tropes, the same ones that JT Guzman had. She didn't know she was dead. I couldn't see the black threads from where I was, but I expected that she was not moving of her own accord. The shadowy figure had her. I was sure of it even if I couldn't see him. Isaac lay on his back, Bobby standing over him. Isaac appeared to have been grabbed by his shaggy hair and yanked so hard that his scalp ripped, revealing part of his skull. Blood poured down his face profusely, but he was alive. It wasn't second blood yet. He didn't have to die. It wasn't clear why the figure had not just killed him though. Settle down, Bobby said nervously as he yanked off his hotel employee shirt and held it against the wound on Isaac's head. You'll be okay. I gotcha. Isaac had a trope that might have been able to heal his injury depending on how much the audience saw, but he was not thinking straight enough to activate it. He was dry heaving while Bobby tried to staunch the flow. The stranger was with them. He stood over and rambled through a few choice phrases like why would it just do that, and I thought it wanted. And why didn't it kill him? I wasn't sure what expression was on his face. Shock? Guilt? I wasn't sure what he was trying to convey. You thought it wanted what? I asked. He looked up at me like a deer in the headlights. He had been so distracted he hadn't seen me arrive. I don't know, he said. You know something you aren't telling us. I screamed. In the distance, Cassie's ghost turned and suddenly someone else was standing in her place. A young red-haired woman who was just as scared and afraid as Cassie had been. I recognized her well enough to know who she was without even looking at the red wallpaper. The red hair was a dead giveaway. That's, I said. That's one of the guests whose luggage was delivered to our room. They were 4 siblings. Their things had gotten lost by the airline and were delivered to their hotel long after they arrived. I had seen their picture. You said you scared them away. I yelled. No, the stranger said. You don't understand. You can't imagine. What did you do? Antoine screamed, acting as if he would lunge at the man if he were able. I heard laughter coming from the direction of the hotel room. The ghost amalgam had climbed in the window. It closed the window and sat on the bed in the room, staring back at us. Suddenly, the hotel seemed further away than it had. I could see it in the distance. I could even see the ghost of JT Guzman running around upstairs as if looking for a place to hide. It said it would give me my daughter back, the stranger confessed. I just had to find new players. That's all. It wanted to talk to the living. I didn't know. You served those people up to it? I said. Shit, is that what we were? A man just got scalped. I figured curse words were okay. No. The stranger said. Honest. I really did want you to stay away. I was going to play the game by myself. Wait, Antoine said, how did you know that it wanted new players? When did you talk to it? When you played the 10-second game or? Antoine let the question hang in the air. The voicemail, I said. You talked to it? The stranger looked away in shame. Play it, I said. I want to hear it. The stranger pulled a phone out of his pocket. He stared at it for a moment and even pressed some of the buttons on the side. I got the sense that he didn't have much experience with them. Then he tossed it to me. It was a normal smartphone of a generic movie brand. What's the password? I asked. Sydney. I typed in 743,639. It unlocked. I went to the big icon that said voicemail and put it on speakerphone. You have 3 saved messages. First saved message, Dad, I need you to come pick me up. Tanya's friend JT is too afraid to contact the dead with us and he's being a creeper. It's really bringing the vibe down. We haven't even seen the scary blue light yet. If you come, can you bang on our room's door? He's really jumpy. I just want to see him squirm. Love you. Second saved message, you said you were coming an hour ago. Where are you? Why are you not picking up? Something strange is happening. I feel like it's working, but I'm getting a funny feeling. Please hurry. Third saved message. A different voice came on, a man's voice. Hey, Dad, Sydney can't come to the phone right now. I see you banging on the doors out there. Unfortunately, you're too late for tonight's game, but you can start another really soon. This silly ritual is really growing on me. I think I'd like some more players so I can get some practice. Gather some for me and I'll think about letting poor Sydney back in from the cold. Can't wait to see you. Better not play any tricks either. I would get mad if you did that. End of messages. You killed them. Antoine screamed. He feigned an attempt to stand but was unable. Bobby, having gotten Isaac straightened out, started working on Antoine's leg. He gathered a broken branch from nearby and started constructing a splint. I couldn't tell if he was doing it properly because I didn't know how it was done. Still, he did his best to look like he was confident as he wrapped his belt around Antoine's leg. I didn't kill them. The stranger said. They played the game. I swear. They knew the rules. I thought. The rules didn't say anything about that thing, Antoine said, gesturing up toward the figure in the window staring at us. You killed those people and now you killed Kimberly. She's gone. That thing killed her. She was the love of my life. You. The stranger nodded in defeat. I'm not going to argue. Truth be told, I didn't care what happened to them. I promise though, I did not want it to happen to you or your girlfriend. You weren't supposed to be here. If I knew some way to run you off without getting run off myself, I would have done it. You didn't do anything at all. Antoine yelled back. Hold still, Bobby said as he worked on Antoine's leg. When this is over, you can get your revenge on me, the stranger said. Kill me. Torture, I don't care. All that matters is that I find my daughter. That's it? I would do anything for her. Off screen. That seemed short. Carousel must have gotten what it needed. Perhaps Antoine lying down on the ground and yelling at the stranger wasn't as compelling as I had assumed. You think that's going to work? Antoine asked, turning his attention to Bobby. Travis used to say that acting could do a lot of what tropes could do, it just wasn't guaranteed to work, Bobby said. He never really elaborated on that or gave an example or demonstrated it. It was just something he would say when I messed up or I was afraid to do something. I think this will work. The logic was sound. Bobby setting Antoine's broken bone on screen combined with Antoine's high grit and walk it off trope might have been enough to swing some healing. Nothing was guaranteed. You might be able to use this as a walking stick, someone behind us said. It was Dina. She had been watching from the shadows, waiting for us to go off screen. She held out Antoine's baseball bat. Found it at the bottom of the hill. Along with a bunch of dead bodies. Did you get my note? We got it, Antoine said. He grabbed his bat and gripped it tight. He was ready for a fight. He was also at the end of his rope. He had been through a lot. Eventually, it would be too much and something would snap. Actually, you might give that back to her for a bit, I said. We need to explain how you got it back to the audience. But great idea. Antoine started to laugh. I am so tired of having to play these stupid games. We could all agree with that. Isaac, you hanging in there? I asked. He gave me a look that might have been, have you seen my head? Instead, he said, when does the pain go away? When we get to the end, I said. I wish I could have the right words to say. I didn't. All I could give him were concrete goals to fixate on. That worked for me. I turned to the stranger. So, you set some people up to die? He nodded. It's looking that way. My plot armor is at 0. I know you all can't see it. Next, we make the trek down the hill. I nodded. Dina needs to come out of the woods and tell us about the bodies. Maybe throw in something about your son's ghost if you have it in the barrel. The stranger will say he needs to go look for his daughter's body. We follow. Wait, we already know Kimberly is dead because Antoine said so. I paused to think up a good reason for us to climb back down the hill when the exit was in the other direction. The shadowy figure was in the house, true. It didn't matter. We'll just follow. We don't need a reason other than that's where the plot is going. This is a storyline based on a corny internet ritual. No one is expecting us to have logical motivations. Going to see a body is a good enough reason, right? Isaac asked. It was good to see him engaging even if it was with blood covering his face. Going to see a body is an excellent reason, I said. In horror movies, anytime someone reports a body, the next shot had all of the important characters near the dead body making commentary on it. No one questioned that sort of logic. In a horror movie, you hear about a murder, and you run, don't walk, to the scene of the crime. The way the scene played out, my money said that the camera left us to go watch the stranger's daughter somewhere. It could also have gone to Constance, but I leaned toward the first. We took our positions and waited. On screen. That should hold for a while, Bobby said to Antoine. I did my best with what I had. Thanks, Antoine said. I watched the figure as it sat on a bed inside the hotel. The building felt so far away. I had no idea how we would get back there. Dina came running out of the forest. You have to come look, she said, out of breath as if she had run all the way here. There's bodies. A dozen of them were at the bottom of the hill. I don't even know where they came from. My son says an evil man did it. He stacked them there like trophies. My son is terrified to go anywhere near it. Oh my God. The window is shut. Bodies? The stranger asked. I need to go there now. If my daughter is there, I don't know what I'll do. He headed off in that direction. We were set to follow. Here, Dina said, handing Antoine his bat. I found this with Kimberly. I'm sorry. Antoine grabbed the bat and used it as a walking stick to pull himself up to a standing position. He could move. His hobble status was no longer solidly lit. It was flickering. That was an improvement. Before we could leave, I heard a loud winding sound. Then, a voice. Do you like it here? The voice asked. It was loud and echoed over the area. Do you like this world? A chill went down my spine. I turned to see the shadowy figure, or at least the ghost of a burned man whose form he hid behind. He was holding the bell from Reply the Departed. He was going to ask us questions. Tick. 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 No, I said, but the words didn't come out of my mouth. It was like they vibrated through the air but never made a sound. There was a winding sound. I do. I like it a lot. Strange place, wouldn't you say? Folded and twisted. Put together like puzzle pieces from 1,000 boxes. One wonders why. Will you try to escape? He was almost breaking character there. What kind of enemy would risk that? Tick. 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 Antoine answered. I couldn't hear what he said. The words were pulled from his mouth like mine had been. Brian. The bell sounded in the distance. Antoine's answer had been reduced to a simple ringing of the bell for yes. The game should go on, I suppose, the figure said. The burned man he was hiding behind stood up and walked out of the room and into the living room. None of us could speak. We just looked at each other. My phone started to ring. It sounded so close to the bell ringing that I almost jumped into the air. I picked it up and answered it. Hello, I said. Riley's phone. This is Riley speaking. Just in case the audience hadn't heard my name yet. My name often didn't get said until late in movies. Evening. Or morning, I might say, Constance said. I've called with the information you requested. Thanks. Lay it on me. To deal with ghosts, simply avoid angering them. Lost spirits, if you believe in such things, are quite docile as long as they are left to their own devices. Certainly don't give them any information that might upset them. There is a hilarious anecdote here from a very popular charlatan who tells a story about having a high school crush follow her until she went to his grave one day. Upon seeing his own gravestone, he went into such a rage that his, and I quote, spiritual energy was converted all at once into psychic energy and it blew up her father's van. Wow, I said. How about the other thing? Yes, the creature you described does not seem to exist. I am pleased to inform you that it is such a novelty that not even the internet ghost columnists have heard of it. I can't find a scrap of information on it. Your friend can rest easy. No information at all about the shadowy figure? How were we supposed to beat it? I couldn't even see its tropes for whatever reason. We were in big trouble. I hung up the call. What did she say? Antoine asked. I had forgotten to put it on speaker. She said she can't find anything about it. Off screen. We were between scenes. Bobby told us so. The plot cycle froze. It was nearing second blood. The second half of the stories went by faster than the first. That was just the nature of the game. Much of the party would be edited out. That wasn't the same for what came after. 20 minutes, Bobby said. The next scene is at the bottom of the hill with the bodies. I don't have any lines. I think my character wasn't supposed to be around so much. Oh well. And so we went downhill. Instead of turning off to the right where I had found Antoine, we went straight to a different part of the river near where we had seen a giant snake lying dead weeks earlier. On our side of the river, a pile of bodies had been stacked up. Kimberly's was on top. There were at least a dozen bodies there. I couldn't say where from. 3 of the 4 red-haired siblings were there. One of the guys was missing. It was awful to look at. They had all died in similar ways. JT Guzman was there, or at least his body was. Snapped neck and all. I stared at the bodies for so long that I almost didn't notice that we weren't alone. On the other side of the river, a young woman stood next to the surviving red-haired sibling. He was an ordinary NPC, so he was staying in character, but in the weird way that NPCs did between scenes where they were in a weird state of perpetual professionalism waiting for the next scene. He stood there with his head bobbing, staring at his siblings' corpses. "Nice to see a fresh face," the young woman screamed. She was a special NPC. Normally, I suspected, her plot armor would be 50. Right then it was 24. I surveyed all of the information I could from the red wallpaper. Sydney Martin is the Scream Queen. She was one of the final girl paragons. Specifically, the Scream Queen Paragon. She was a paragon. She was acting as a player. My casting director Trope told me. Sydney Martin, the unlucky object of so much obsession, people around town are always gossiping about how she ends up involved in so many unlikely tragedies. It must be her fault, right? Having found herself trapped in the parallel world of the dead, she must find a way to survive as she waits for her father to save her. Whether she likes it or not, she's going to be the center of everyone's attention. Tropes. Off-screen survival allows her to make unlikely strides in her efforts to survive mounting odds when off-screen, including finding weapons, allies, or information. However, every stroke of luck will come at the cost of some terrifying thrill or cost. Explore thoughtfully. We can't stay here allows her to go on screen to foreshadow an imminent skirmish. Guarantees the fight or chase scene will happen on screen, but also buffs her nearby party's hustle and grit. Sydney was pretty, but weathered by stress and fatigue. She was no nonsense to her core. The 10-second game, she screamed. What happened to Reply the Departed? The stranger answered her. This is Reply the Departed. Carousel messed with things. She took a deep breath. Figures, we're being chased. They should come out of the woods behind us soon. Come out and help me cross if I can't. NPC Saganer. How long do we have, Bobby? I asked. 2 minutes, he answered. 2 minutes, the stranger screamed over the river. Sydney nodded and walked back into the tree line until I couldn't see her. The NPC followed. We did the same, backing up a distance so we could get a shot of us approaching. When the scene started, we would rush to see the scene. On screen. We raced toward the river. We all did our appropriate reactions. Antoine did his best to move ahead with his busted leg, crying out for Kimberly. He grabbed her body from the pile and wept. Those were real tears. The stranger tore the pile down looking for his daughter's corpse. He didn't find it. He was panicked, but also overjoyed at not finding her body. In the distance, I heard someone yelling. Dad! Sydney screamed. She carried something in her hands. At first, I couldn't make it out, but soon I got an idea. It was the mirror from the vanity that had been broken off. I was wondering where that had gone. She and the red-haired NPC ran closer, but he wasn't fast enough. He was falling behind. Sydney hit the river with a powerful splash, still holding onto the large mirror by its wooden legs. She splashed across. The stranger rushed out to grab her and haul her ashore. The NPC wasn't as lucky. They were being chased by an army of ghosts. Each of them had died from various causes, but there was something different about them. They were gaunter, thinner than JT or Cassie had been. They were ravenous. The ghosts on the far side of the river were difficult to make out. Like the armless ghost that I had seen while playing the 10-second game, they almost looked like they were placed in the scene so that they would be hard to see at first glance. It was like the world's creepiest game of I Spy. I spy a legless Civil War-era soldier crawling behind a bush. I spy a woman staring at us from behind a dead tree. I spy a man holding his own head in the shadows. The only way I could really make them out properly was on the red wallpaper, which showed them plainly in their broken forms. I had expected them to be like JT Guzman, but it appeared they were a different type of ghost in the context of this story. Flood of Spirits. Plot armor, 40. Underscore 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 underscore. Tropes. Fungible enemy. This enemy is composed of countless largely interchangeable units whose numbers will not diminish until the scene is concluded. There always seems to be more to come. Strength in numbers. The enemy is at its strongest in groups. Singling its members out will weaken them substantially. Be our guest. This entity's purpose is to guide characters toward the next scene or keep them from leaving the setting when they wander too far. Hive mind. This creature's mind is linked to that of similar creatures. Walking crime scene. This entity's ghostly form reveals clues as to the nature of its demise. Their Be Our Guest trope spelled out that they were border enemies meant to keep us from wandering off. They were not the primary antagonist. That was little comfort as the ghost seemed to flood in from across the river. The NPC that had been with Sydney was dragged back into the forest in the distance. He screamed the entire time. I couldn't make out which entity was doing it. Perhaps they all were. They were acting as one unit, stopping us from venturing too far. Sydney and the stranger made it to shore and embraced each other. Their reunion was cut short as the ghosts kept coming. Bobby was already dragging Antoine away from Kimberly's broken body while he protested. "I've got to bring her body back." Isaac was tearfully leading the pack. I joined the caravan as we moved further up the mountain. Dina was already out of sight. The ghosts gave chase, but never abandoned their game of hide and seek. I never saw one break into a sprint or actually move. I just saw the group flood forward as new ghosts came into view in the scenery. It was more of a hike through a haunted forest than a proper chase scene, though that status was lit. Sydney held the stranger's hand and pulled him up the mountain behind her. In her other hand, she still carried the vanity mirror by its wooden leg. "I knew you were alive," he said tearfully. "Dad. Everyone else is dead. I didn't mean for any of this." "I know you didn't. Neither did I. We just have to make it back to the suite. Everything will be okay." I didn't hear the whole conversation. They did a lot of back and forth, giving Carousel all of the stuff it needed to stitch together its reunion scene. Antoine eventually interrupted. "What's the mirror for?" he asked, his voice cracking from either physical or emotional pain. "One of us had to." Sydney looked down at the object in her hand. "It confuses them," she said. "They don't like seeing it." I had other questions. Too many questions. "Why did we have to cover the mirrors?" I asked. "The rules for the 10-second game said we had to." Sydney shook her head. "I don't know. I assumed it was because they were like windows, that spirits could pass through them. We had no idea what we were getting into. Mirrors had to have something to do with the whole ordeal. Kimberly's strange encounter in the bathroom had established that. Of course, we may have simply avoided that whole storyline by not following it up. That didn't bother me any, but it did leave unanswered questions. The ghost stopped following us as we arrived yet again back at the field downhill from the suite. The window was open again. "Careful," I said. "It could be a trap." The dark figure was nowhere to be found. That was worrying. "Even then," Antoine said, "I'd rather be trapped in the house than free out here." That was something to consider. We waited for a beat. I was right to suspect the worst. JT Guzman, our dead spectral friend, stepped out from beside the window. He wasn't quite himself. Thin black threads impaled his pale skin. I could barely make it out. Even at this distance, I could see his fear. He stepped out of the window and began walking toward us. "Help!" he screamed. "It's after me." We huddled together. We weren't going to outrun him. Even if we did, the story wasn't going to move forward that way. We had just been corralled up in this direction. "Antoine, despite his injury, took the lead. He supported himself on his bat, but he was ready to wield it at a moment's notice. Whatever good that would do. Just let us go, he screamed. What do you want? Suddenly, JT stopped screaming. It was like something took control. He went from a yelling spirit caught in a trap to a puppet. You didn't fall for it, huh? JT said. They weren't his words though. It wasn't even like he was possessed. It was more like he was being held at gunpoint and forced to say the line. JT stopped talking. He moved his mouth, but the entity controlling him was speaking from behind him. I just wanted to play, he said. I saw some kids talking to ghosts and thought that looked like fun. I have an interest in the subject. I think you can tell. I always liked ghost stories. This one is a bit cliché, though, right? I practically know the script by heart. He laughed. He was going full meta in the way that a film buff was supposed to. I hadn't done it often because I was afraid of breaking the fourth wall too hard. This person didn't care. Some kids find a game that lets them talk to the dead. Spooky stuff. A jump scare or two, sure. But you better run from the blue light. Remember that part of the rules? Who knows what that'll do? Best not ever test it? I could have waited for you to find your way back in the house, but I decided against it. He laughed again. As he did, a withered arm slowly reached out from behind him. It was holding an ornate blue lantern. The arm was pale and atrophied. JT turned. As he did, the owner of the arm came into view and JT disappeared. The figure before us might have been a man once, but now, it was a disfigured wraith beyond recognition. He wore loose clothing and a hood. His feet were bloody stumps. The figure was twisted and ancient as if it were arthritis incarnate. Groans came from the man's mouth. It was like he was trying to talk but was unable. Lantern bearer, wraith. Plot armor, 55. Underscore 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 underscore. Tropes. Fate worse than death. This entity does not want to kill its victims, though, in the end, they will wish it had. Victims are written off instead of killed. Don't show the monster. This entity is not scripted to appear on screen. Only the effects of its existence are detectable. Interests align. This entity does not need the players to lose in order to achieve its goals. 6 additional tropes not perceptible. He tried to speak. All I heard were groans. The voice from the shadowy figure returned. Poor fellow can't even move his jaw, it's been so long. More ghost than man now. Oh, wait. You weren't supposed to see him at all, were you? It's scarier when he's just a distant blue light. He laughed. Want to know what would happen if you saw the man with the blue lantern? In the little game you were playing. He paused. He turned the man's head toward Antoine. I didn't see what happened, but I figured it out soon enough. Antoine's infection status lit up. That was the gimmick of the wraith. Possession of some kind. The man under the control of the shadowy figure started to groan. He tried to move, but his old bones were no match for the figure that bound him. Antoine lifted up his bat. I only hoped that someone would take my burden, he said, tearfully. Then, as if he had no injury at all, he stood up. He brought his bat down hard on the stranger's head with a sickening crack. Over and over again. It was such a surprise no one had time to react at first. When Sydney tried to stop him, he threw her to the side. Her mirror shattered as she hit the ground. Antoine, fight it? I screamed because I needed to do something. Antoine's over here, the dark figure said from behind the pale wraith. I looked at the man. I saw in his cataract-covered eyes that it was true. Antoine's soul was in the decrepit old wraith. Antoine's body stopped beating the stranger just as second blood passed and we entered the finale. This is not what I wanted, Antoine's mouth said. There was a moment of silence as the rest of us contemplated what to do. Anyway, the dark figure said. Something happened. Suddenly Antoine started crying out. His infected status switched to off. The pale man stopped making noise. The whole time, he never let go of the lantern. It was like his fingers were welded closed over its handle. I caught myself staring at the lantern. Strange. I really wanted to take it from the man. But that passed as Antione fell to the ground in pain. In the ghost story, the teens survive the night after their harrowing experiences, the dark figure said. It looks like all is well, but just as they're leaving the haunted house, one of the teens looks in the mirror and instead of his own reflection, it's the old man. That's how it ends, right? Possession is fun, but body swapping is a whole other thing. I like to remain in control myself. Antoine recovered from his temporary possession. He took his now bloody bat and used it to push himself to his feet. I'll ask again, Antoine screamed. What do you want? Why are you doing this? It's like I said, I just wanted to play the game. See you in the finale. Off screen. The old man with the lantern turned. He disappeared and was replaced by a woman who dressed like a drenched Lucille Ball, makeup running everywhere. Water ran down from the top of her head to the ground in a light pitter-patter. Whoever said brains over brawn never got hit in the head with a baseball, huh, the woman said, looking over at the stranger's dead body. She didn't fight for control as much as JT did. From the look of her, she had been dead quite a while. I could tell it was the figure speaking through her though. She looked from Antoine to me. I have to go put this lantern guy back before I get in trouble. Between you and me, I don't think I was supposed to collect him. The figure laughed from behind her. We watched as the dark figure walked his host's dripping body into the distance, leaving a trail of water in his wake. We looked around at each other in shock. I didn't know what to think about this enemy. Damn it, Sydney said, examining her shattered mirror. She walked up to the stranger's body and nudged it with her foot. What are you doing? I asked. Sometimes he fakes it, she answered. I didn't think he was faking it. His head wasn't exactly shattered, but still, the sound of Antoine's bat hitting his skull had been pretty definitive. Antoine was taking in deep breaths to calm himself. He looked shaken. I approached him cautiously. You okay? He didn't answer for a moment. Yep. His body shook against his will. He was not okay. We made our way to the suite. What's the story here? I asked Sydney. The bad guy just lets us go to the suite for no reason. That guy went way off script, Sydney said. The enemy did? Dina asked, having reappeared. They can do that. Apparently. Most enemies don't know they're in Carousel, how could they? They would screw everything up. Some though, some know everything. They like it here. Still, I don't know what that guy's deal is. I climbed in the window first and helped the others through. He left us a gift, Dina said, pointing to the bed where the 10-second bell sat. That was good in the sense that it meant we could ward off ghosts, but it would be hard to explain why we suddenly had it back. Don't use that one, Sydney said. It makes no sense for him to leave that for us. She pulled something out of her pocket. It was a plastic version of the bell that must have been manufactured for a more modern version of the Reply the Departed board game. We can just use mine. We walked into the living room. That scene didn't go like it was supposed to. How are we supposed to know what's next? Dina asked. Bobby spoke up. While Strander Blake rips the soul from his second blood victim, the remaining players run for the safety of the suite where they will prepare for the final bat. Oops. It disappeared. He was reading off his limited script. It really paid to have an honorary NPC in the party. Strander Blake? I asked. I couldn't even see him on the red wallpaper. It sounded like he was supposed to kill the stranger differently than he did. Well, maybe he's shy, Sydney said casually, like this was just another day at work. We need to get ready. Don't forget. We still have to play the game as soon as we're on screen again. Where's the rule sheet? I was just glad to be back in the suite instead of out there in the dead world. If I never spoke to another ghost, it would be too soon. The stranger said this isn't how the storyline is supposed to go, I said to Sydney as we walked into the living room. You seemed surprised with the change. I've only played it once when I was brought in through a ticket, she said as she grabbed one of the remaining chicken tenders from the plate on the counter. This is the kiddie ride. You watch the ghosts get closer and closer until eventually, you can see the red wallpaper for the first time. No one has to die. No one can leave. She hungrily devoured the chicken. These aren't bad. I just followed the instructions on the bag, Bobby admitted, almost blushing. Why is this version different? Antoine asked. Why change so many things? Couldn't the storyline have just scaled to our level? That's what the atlas seemed to imply. Sydney shrugged her shoulders. Carousel had a different plan. It couldn't change the story completely. This storyline is pretty important for the through line in an indirect sort of way. It just took the training wheels off because you didn't need them. Sure, I said, took the training wheels off, slashed the tires, and set the whole thing on fire. Sydney nodded in agreement. She was projecting strength, as if all of this didn't bother her. I didn't know if I bought it. The question remains, Antoine said, how are we supposed to beat an enemy who won't play by the rules? Maybe we don't, Sydney answered. She undid her ponytail and redid it, this time tighter. Maybe Carousel isn't just playing hardball. Maybe, it actually wants to kill you all. She said it so matter-of-factly. Her statement hit the others like a punch to the gut. I couldn't afford to think about that possibility. Let's figure out what we know for sure, I said. There had to be some way to beat Strander Blake originally before he started going off script. Antoine, what happened with you and Kimberly in the room? Antoine thought for a moment. I could see it was painful for him to dredge up the memory. He spent so long pretending not to remember anything that recounting a tragic event was difficult. We talked to a spirit who was missing an arm. That spirit left quickly. Didn't say much. Talked to another spirit. The drowned woman. They kept getting closer and closer until we started hearing laughter. Then an arm stuck out from behind her and threw a flashlight through the window. The next thing I knew there was a struggle and it grabbed Kimberly. I chased after it trying to keep her alive. It went on like that for a while until she stopped moving and I was all alone. Throwing something through the window couldn't have been in the original storyline, but it might have been in this version. That part had to have been scripted, I said. Clearly the story was supposed to move outside at first blood and then back inside at second blood. I have no idea how the Blue Lantern ghost was supposed to fit in. Strander said he wasn't supposed to grab that one, Bobby said. Maybe that guy wasn't supposed to be part of the story? That wasn't likely. The blue light was mentioned in the rules for the 10-second game. Not the first time you play, no, Sydney said. But eventually he shows up to discourage you from running the storyline too often. Can't really expand on that, but you'll understand soon anyway. We were supposed to run this storyline multiple times. No doubt to talk to a specific ghost or geist, rather. We don't have much experience rerunning stories, Dina said. Is there something we need to know? The more you rerun the story, the more you learn about it and its different possibilities, Sydney answered as she plopped down on the couch. Sometimes there isn't much to learn, but often there is, even if it's just a unique version that gets you more experience. Other times, you can find something that's important, but, again, you'll figure that out when you get to the next part. We asked her more questions about rescues and finding bases and she answered as much as her script allowed her to. While she could talk freely most of the time as a player, there were clearly some topics Carousel restricted. Namely, questions about Carousel and the script itself. Carousel is complicated, she eventually managed to say. I wasn't here for the beginning. Some paragons take the mantle early in the timeline, they might know more. My dad and I only moved to town in 1997 when I became the Scream Queen Paragon. Of course, you weren't around for that. You all came in 2022, right? What a peculiar way to phrase that. You've been here for 25 years. Isaac asked. I didn't say that, she answered, looking down at the coffee table contemplatively. Look, I am not used to being around new players. Maybe you should talk to Constance about the timelines after we win. Right now, we have a big battle coming up and no plans to win. Our muscle is hobbled and all of our cute, audience-friendly characters died at the end of the first act. I don't even have a player trope that will be useful in this part of the story. We know who's next, Bobby said. That was true. Isaac was next in the targeting priority, assuming that none of us fell for any traps or did something incredibly stupid. Isaac was very aware of his impending doom and sat wide-eyed. His head was still bleeding, likely from a spike in blood pressure. His incapacitated status was flickering every so often, but it was nothing to worry about. For what it's worth, I said, I do have a plan. We're going to have to be careful though. Once he's onto us it'll be pretty easy for him to stop us. I think I know exactly how we're supposed to beat this guy. We have to move Cassie's body. I told them my plan. If I followed the clues properly, then we had a chance. On screen. As soon as the camera came on, we got into character. Luckily, being in character meant acting scared, confused, and worn out. We didn't have to dig too deep to play that part. "I'll play," Antoine said after we sat, staring at the plastic bell on the coffee table. It worked the same as the metal one, it just sounded more like a loud rattlesnake rattle than an actual bell. I was happy not to hear the high-pitched breeing again. "You're hurt," Dina said. "I should do it?" "We'll both go," Antoine said, looking very nervous. He was barely holding it in. Dina snatched the plastic clapper off the table and walked with Antoine to the room we had decided would be next on our list. Antoine limped behind with his bat as a cane. Bobby's splint had stayed on pretty well, but it wasn't going to support any weight. Antoine's recovery was all grit, determination, and movie magic. As soon as they left, we were off screen for a moment. "You sure the audience knows about your bell, right?" I asked Sydney. "Oh, I'm sure. I had to play those scenes out." Sometimes Carousel made players play through scenes that occurred before the film and sometimes it didn't. The stranger hadn't played through his scenes, but that was likely because the audience wouldn't see those. We waited as the silence turned into the sound of ticking. The plastic bell Sydney had brought wasn't as loud as the metal one, but it still echoed through the house. Tick. 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 Rattle. The sound of it sent a shiver up my spine. This went on 3 more times. They got 3 yes and 1 no by my count. We still didn't know what questions we were supposed to ask, so we asked about Jedediah Geist, just as Sydney and her friends had originally. It annoyed me that there might not be any payoff to that plotline. Who was this guy and why was he important? Perhaps that was the reason we were supposed to rear on this storyline. We needed to figure out more about him. Finally, after 10 or so minutes, Antoine and Dina returned. On screen. We took turns going into the room and playing the game, all except Isaac. It would have been better if he could stay in the living room, but, as I suspected, the storyline wouldn't move forward that way. He was next in line to be targeted, so he had to go into the room and play the 10-second game. Otherwise, the plot cycle wouldn't move an inch. After Sydney and I got back, we all looked at each other. We knew what we had to do. "So far so good," I said, acting relieved that the mysterious Stranded Lake had not made an appearance. "Guess I'm next," Bobby said. "I'll go too," Isaac said. He was shivering with every word. His head was in bad shape, but he knew what he had to do. Our efforts to do it differently were in vain. We couldn't avoid putting him in the line of fire forever. Dina handed the bell to Bobby. Isaac was pale and Bobby basically had to drag him. He kept staring at the couch in the middle of the room where Cassie's body had been. He was doing far better than any of us would have been on our first storyline. Bobby led Isaac into the bedroom, but the cameras stayed in the living room with the rest of us. That meant the focus was on our reactions to whatever we heard in that room. I kept telling myself that no one needed to die. Technically, we could get through the story without another person getting killed. That didn't seem likely though. We waited quietly for the game to begin. It didn't take long. Tick. 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 Rattle. That meant yes. The process continued. Tick. 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 Rattle. And again. Tick. 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 There was silence for a while. "Cassie." Isaac muttered quietly. My plan had worked. A chilling sound of laughter followed. It was showtime. Isaac and Bobby backed up toward the door, still making eye contact with whatever entity had arrived to greet them. Once they got out of the room, we could see them from down the hallway. Those of us in the living room stood up, ready for what came next. Isaac and Bobby turned around, breaking one of the fundamental rules of the 10-second game. Suddenly, as they turned, a figure appeared in the hall. It was Cassie, or at least her spirit. She had a hand-shaped bruise around her neck and bloodshot eyes. The black thread ran through her skin, binding her to the dark figure behind her, Stranded Lake. "Isaac," she said, though her voice was scratchy and harsh from her death wound. "I was lost in the woods. I can't believe I finally found my way back." Like most of the ghosts from this storyline, she didn't know she was dead. She had the same enemy tropes as JT Guzman and the rest. Bobby practically dragged Isaac out of the doorway and past Cassie's ghost and into the living room with the rest of us. "Where are you going?" Cassie asked harshly. "Haven't you wondered where I was?" Isaac looked at her in horror. No, Cass, I've known where you were this whole time. He looked back toward the couch. So did Cassie. Right on cue, Antione and I reached down and flipped over the couch to reveal what we had put underneath it. Cassie's body. We had moved it for just this reason. You're dead, Cassie, Isaac said. That thing killed you. Cassie's spirit looked at her body with a gaze of abject horror. She put her hands to her throat. Suddenly, she started making a gurgling sound like the one she had made when dying. The gurgling transitioned to a ghastly shriek. She stared down at the black threads in her arms and raged, pulling against them with all her might. No. Strander Blake screamed from behind her. He was losing control. The clue we had been given about how to defeat him had been the fact that there was no lore about him at all. Every single bit of lore was about the ghosts that this storyline produced. Constance had relayed a story about how they lost control and got violent upon learning of their demise. That had to be significant. It just so happened that this new enemy had a strange habit of strapping ghosts to his body. Sure, with most ghosts, that probably made him more powerful, but the ghosts from this storyline were more of a liability. Cassie transformed from the perfect image of her dead body to a spirit of pure terror. Her features darkened, her arms lengthened. She pulled at the black threads until they started snapping. What is happening? Strander screamed angrily. He must not have been able to see the ghosts' tropes. He could see their powers, as he had with the Blue Lantern ghost, but that was the crucial difference between abilities in lore and tropes in the meta. Cassie became more demon than ghost as she tore chunks of black sinew from Strander as he screamed. He tried desperately to fight her, to bring out one of his other ghosts, but he was tied to her. The house started to shake as Strander fought for control. I never got a good look at him, but I could tell he was struggling. The plot cycle was well into the final battle, but we weren't quite finished yet. The struggle continued as Cassie's enraged spirit damaged the walls and floor, anything in reach. Then Cassie screamed so loud I could feel the sound in my teeth as I hid around a corner. What happened next sounded like an explosion of anguish as Cassie's spirit dissipated rapidly, causing chunks of wood and wallpaper to fly around the room. I looked out to survey the damage. Cassie was gone. Laying on the ground where she had been, was the drowned ghost of a woman that Strander had used before. You tricked me, she said, but even as her spirit spoke, Strander spoke too, blending to create a terrifying conjoined voice. To the audience, it would sound like Strander was talking to us, but I got the distinct impression that he was talking to Carousel itself. You tricked me. This wasn't the... He found himself unable to speak. I'm going to kill all of them, he screamed in rage. Then he looked at us in fury. The final battle wasn't yet over. What now? Strander Blake, as the script apparently called him, stood directly behind the spirit of a drowned woman. I couldn't see him, but I could almost feel the rage coming off of him. It wasn't just rage though. There was fear there too. Dozens of ghostly arms appeared from behind the drowned woman. They belonged to different spirits that Strander had collected. They were all sewn to him. My brain could barely comprehend what I was seeing. It was almost an optical illusion, as if the owners of those arms must have been somewhere, but they weren't. We knew what came next. He would go after Isaac, the character with the lowest plot armor in the scene. That was how the game worked. But Strander Blake didn't seem to care at all. The dripping woman walked forward quickly and one of his arms reached out and struck at Dina, who was closest to him. Dina tried to dodge, but it was pointless. The owner of that arm leaped out and struck her. She flew across the room. I still couldn't properly see him, couldn't read his tropes. Perhaps he had a trope that allowed him to attack whoever he wanted. That certainly threw a hitch in my plans, but even as that thought went through my head, I realized I was wrong. Strander Blake was reeling in pain. It was as if attacking Dina had physically hurt him, if such a thing were possible. He screamed in pain. He was fighting for control. I could see the dripping woman eyeing Isaac as Strander's next target, but he screamed again and forced her to look at me. I could see the strands of black thread pulling against her. He was trying to resist the rules. I pick him, he screamed. You were mine. Your little tricks. I could watch but not touch. You were marked for death and now I'll finish it. Was he mad about oblivious bystander? I let the steam out of his little trap and he hadn't gotten over it. I jumped back, but it was a pathetic attempt. He was so fast. He screamed as he launched himself across the room at me. I backed up toward the first room I had played the 10-second game in, and Strander tackled me into the darkness. He slammed the door behind us. Off screen. We were off screen, just me and him. He threw me against a wall hard. He wanted to kill me, but he couldn't. His threads tightened, threatening to rip from the ghastly flesh of his host, but she wouldn't budge, couldn't budge. This wasn't what I was promised, he said. I was tricked. I was terrified and my brain was in fight or flight mode, but I was all out of fight. Just being thrown against the wall had incapacitated me and hobbled me. I couldn't even tell what my injuries were. I hurt all over. But curiosity was strong enough to fight through the pain. Who tricked you? I asked. He hesitated from answering. He must not have been sure. Silas Durkin, he eventually answered. He was enraged and frustrated. Said he had a player problem and I was just the one to fix it. He described his world as one of death and horror. How could I resist? I didn't know he would do this to me. He lied. He said nothing of these chains. How could he humiliate me like this? The Strand o' Black? Living hell itself. He was new. Carousel had brought him here under false pretenses too. This is a circus. Everyone wears chains here, I said. My heart was beating so fast I couldn't even hear what I was saying. Not the guests, Strander said. Not yet. I could hear the others pounding on the door. Strander Blake still pulled against whatever chains he said were binding him, but he couldn't kill me. I wasn't next. We were off screen. It might have been possible under some circumstances. If I were less prominent in the storyline, if he had the right tropes, if he hadn't disobeyed, but Carousel seemed to be making a point. Eventually, he relented. I'll finish the other, he said. Then I'll come back for you. He stood and walked back toward the door. As he did, my eyes adjusted to the dim light of the room finally, and I saw the vanity in the corner. It was the same one that Sydney had broken to obtain the mirror she wielded on the outside. Sydney knew the ghosts avoided mirrors. On a hunch, I did the only thing I could. The insert shot ability allowed me to draw my allies' attention to an important object from those objects discovered in the party phase. I had found one, the mirror in the bathroom where Kimberly had taken a shower earlier. The mirror was poorly covered. Whatever reason it had been there originally, an unused subplot, it was still a mirror. I activated my ability and sent out the information to my teammates. Suddenly, right before Strander got to the door, they stopped banging on it. I heard them talking. Before he opened the door, he tried in vain to do something I couldn't quite perceive. At first, it was like he was trying to twist the drowned woman's body and change the ghost he was presenting, but he didn't seem able to. It dawned on me what he was trying to do. You can't use a spirit that isn't a part of the storyline, I said. I could tell he was annoyed still. He turned to look at me. As he did, the drowned woman disappeared and Kimberly emerged. The script tells me to use this one, he said. Friend of yours? I nodded. Riley, Kimberly cried. Her throat was crushed, but she didn't seem aware. What's going on? I was lost in the dark for so long. I don't know how I got back here. What do we do? How do we win? It was actually Kimberly. She didn't know she was bound to Strander Blake. She was afraid. Antoine needs you, I said. He's hiding in the bathroom across the building. You know the one. Go to him. She nodded. She reached down and grabbed the door with her ghostly arm and walked out of the room. One of Strander's many hands waved at me as she went. On the red wallpaper, my written-off status was lit. I couldn't help my friends this way. I had to trust that they could figure it out themselves. The strangest thing happened as I stood there. I realized that the screen I usually use to rewatch old storylines was on the red wallpaper. It was my director's monitor trope. My Death Watch ability had activated. At first, I feared I had been killed and just didn't realize it, but as I checked and rechecked my trope, I noticed that Death Watch didn't activate when my dead status lit up. It activated at my demise. That meant it still worked if I was dead because I was written off, not just when I was physically killed. That was interesting. I kept one eye on the screen, watching as Strander crept across the living room. Sometimes the footage was polished and perfect, other times it was rough, as if it had been cut from the final film. I was watching the movie in real time. That wasn't how it normally worked. I usually only saw the finished product. I worked my hardest to stand. I found out why my hobbled status had lit up. My hip had been broken. Still, I crawled to the door and looked down the hallway. I could see Kimberly/Strander Blake cautiously moving across the floor both in my head and with my eyes. I got the sense that Strander didn't exactly get much say in the matter. Freaky, I said under my breath. I couldn't bear to go any further with my hip's condition. The movie continued to play on the red wallpaper. Antoine, Kimberly said softly. She started to cry. Antoine, where are you? She kept walking toward the bathroom until she got to the door. She walked through and I lost sight of her, but I could still see the footage in my mind. Antoine was in the bathroom with Isaac and Sydney. Bobby and Dina were in the wind, likely off-screen as backup. Kimberly? Antoine asked. He was crying. I've been looking for you, she said softly. Antoine walked close to her and looked down into her eyes. We're going to be okay, he said, fighting through the tears. We need to leave, she said. We need to go somewhere safe. You're always safe with me, Antoine said. We're going to be a family. Kimberly pulled against the threads in her arms and embraced Antoine. Antoine hugged her back, though he eyed the covered mirror. Dina's slender arm reached through the doorway and grabbed the towel off of the mirror. What I saw there was terrifying. I saw a dozen faces all staring at the mirror from behind Kimberly. Each was a terrifying visage of death. They saw themselves in the mirror too. Kimberly, Antoine said. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you or the baby. What? Kimberly asked. Antoine pointed over toward the mirror. Kimberly followed his gaze and stared at herself, her features reflecting in the moonlit room. It got you, Kimberly, Antoine said. I couldn't stop it. Kimberly looked down at her nails, broken and bloody. She started to choke. Much as we had seen with Cassie, she became enraged, but more than that, the other spirits that had seen themselves started to reach out, to fight against Strander. He started to scream, a half of a dozen ghosts ripped and tore away from him, snapping black threads and destroying whatever it was that he was made of. He cried out in genuine pain and anger. This went on until Strander took the form of the drowned woman again and ran for the window of the nearest room. He opened it and practically fell outside. Kimberly's ghost stayed around long enough for a shot of her disintegrating right next to Antoine, but she didn't hurt him. There was a long moment of silence as things wound down. Sydney grabbed her little plastic clicker and went into one of the rooms. When Antoine asked where she was going, she answered, "We have to keep playing the game." After a few more moments, Carousel had gotten its closing footage. The end. We had done it. The lights came back on. Suddenly, my hip didn't hurt. I stood back up and walked into the living room. I was so tired I was willing to sleep even in the haunted house. That was even after Carousel reset us. Discovering a new use case for the Death Watch ability was fascinating, but I was emotionally spent. I just wanted the next part to go by quickly. Antoine approached me as soon as I was back in the living room. His injury was gone, but the gaunt look on his face was still there. The light behind his eyes was out. I knew what he wanted. I handed him my out like a light trope. He took it and didn't say a thing. Isaac came out of the bathroom. He looked back and forth for his sister. "She'll be back soon, I promised." He sat down on one of the chairs. "It's kind of freaky, isn't it?" I asked as Isaac ran his fingers through his hair, amazed at the absence of blood or injury. He almost started to smile. "It's amazing," he said. So often we were distracted by the abject horror of Carousel that we failed to recognize how awe-inspiring some of its abilities actually were. If it wasn't dead set on torturing us, this place could have been wonderful. "Just remember," I said. "It's easy to shake off injuries. I guess the adrenaline never really dies long enough for you to stop being in shock. Death takes a toll. Psychological horror. That takes a toll." Isaac looked around. "Cassie's going to be messed up." I nodded. His eyes shifted to the couch where Antoine had laid down. He had already used my sleep trope. He equipped his "you were having a nightmare" trope. When Kimberly got back she would activate that trope and help alleviate whatever trauma he tried so hard to keep hidden. Sydney had struck up a conversation with Dina while Bobby went around asking if anyone wanted food from the kitchens. It didn't take long for the crunch of broken glass to announce the return of both Kimberly and Cassie. They could have used the front door, but the window was closer. Kimberly looked shaken but held Cassie's hand. Cassie was crying. I couldn't blame her. The first death of her career at Carousel was worse in some ways than any of mine. Isaac, she cried out. Isaac ran to hug her. He sat her down and they began whispering to each other. Isaac didn't seem to know what to say or how to act, so he just sat as his sister cried into his shoulder. I couldn't hear everything she said, but I could tell that she was reassuring him and not the other way around. That was just her nature. Kimberly saw Antoine sleeping and immediately sat down next to him and reached out her hand to stroke his head. She leaned in and whispered those magic words, "Wake up, my love, you were having a nightmare." There was a knock at the door. The room went silent. Antoine opened his eyes and was immediately alert. He was up and off the couch in an instant. Bat in hand, he walked to answer the door. "Who's there?" he cried out. "You have a library book overdue." Recognizing her voice, Antoine answered the door. Constance Barlow entered without any fanfare. "Sydney," she asked immediately, surprised to see our late arrival. Sydney broke away from her conversation with Dina to greet Constance. They looked happy to see each other. Constance was the cheery version of herself I had met at the library. The Paragons must have known each other very well. Constance turned her attention to me. I sat, slumped in my chair, and waved. She walked across the room and took a seat next to me. "I see you decided not to use me as a distraction for the monster you described." I shook my head. I tossed the idea around, but I had a better idea. I explained how we ended up defeating Stranded Lake. "Angry ghosts. At least my research didn't go to waste," she said. "Nope," I said. I had more questions to ask her, but before I could, a new appearance lit up the room. "Congratulations, Silas," the showman announced, "you won a ticket." Isaac looked like he had seen a ghost. Well, perhaps that expression wasn't as useful anymore. He turned in his seat to get a better look. We had told him about Silas, but seeing a fortune-telling machine appear out of nowhere was not something you could prepare for, especially one as flamboyant as Silas. As usual, Antoine was the first to get his tickets. We all got in line, including Constance and Sydney, which I found strange. Before I could inquire, the line moved forward. Antoine was shuffling through his tickets and found something that appeared to have stumped him. He read through it before I had even gotten my tickets. His eyes went straight to me after he was finished. "Riley," he said. "Take a look at this." It was a large, rectangular slip of laminated paper with lots of tiny words on them. I grabbed it and read it over. License. License number, E2455B0465. Issued to, Antoine Stone. Ability granted. The holder of this license is granted the ability to invoke specific powers or wield certain objects from a horror movie realm without the need of a trope. This license authorizes the use of the 10-second bell from the movie, The 10-Second Game, Reply the Departed. Usage permitted in, the Throughline X, all storylines. Usage terms. Lore constraints. The holder may use the selected ability within the lore constraints without the need to activate the associated storyline. Protection. The player is shielded from inadvertently triggering the original storyline or any mobile storyline that might migrate into that location. Rule compliance. The rules of use, as described in the storyline, must be strictly adhered to in addition to any listed conditions. Consequence awareness. The user is not immune to the consequences stemming from improper or natural use of the ability. This license does not prevent unrelated storylines from being triggered. Rescue clause. Death as a result of using this ability subjects the player to rescue from the respective movie's storyline. Conditions for use. Keepsake requirement. The player must possess a keepsake of the targeted spirit or the applicable murder weapon. Location specificity. Usage must occur at the site of the spirit's death. Significant date. Contact with the spirit should be made on a date meaningful to the spirit, with the date of death being highly effective. Notes. Stranded Lake will be kept at bay. Sincerest apologies for his lack of professionalism from the City Council and the Mayor. Misuse and revocation. Improper use of this license or the granted ability or object may result in immediate revocation and additional penalties as per the governing laws. I examined the license until it was time for me to get my tickets. This laminated slip of paper allowed us to contact ghosts related to the through line. That would explain some things. Why had this story, which did not appear to be related to the plot of the through line, come first in the through line? You think maybe this is the whole reason we were sent here? I asked. I don't have a guess better than that, Antoine said. He seemed distracted. I handed the ticket back to him. While I had been reading the license, he had been reading one of his tropes. It wasn't equipped so I couldn't see it on the red wallpaper. I couldn't say what upset him about it. Carousel was known to reward mocking tickets to those who performed poorly. Perhaps he had gotten one. I decided not to press the issue. When it was my turn to press the button, I did so and received one stat ticket, one license identical to Antoine's, and 2 tropes. Cutaway death. Type, rule. Archetype, film buff. Aspect, filmmaker. Stat used. The enemy is ready to pounce, their weapon at the ready. Their victim is helpless. Everyone knows what's about to happen. Right as the death blow is about to be struck, the screen cuts away. The enemy's true savagery will be shown later, it seems. Off-screen death. The player's death can now occur off-screen. When equipped, the scene will cut to off-screen in the moments leading up to a character's apparent death. The enemy will still try to kill the player, however, off-screen. If the player survives, their status will be written off instead of dead. Be warned, unless you have a trope or powerful narrative support for your miraculous recovery, you might want to avoid being caught on screen during a final take. Many a bit actor survived because their character's death ended up on the cutting room floor. What doesn't kill them makes them angry. Type, debuff. Archetype, any. Aspect. Stat used, savvy. If you take a swing at a monster, you better kill it because some injuries just make a monster more dangerous. Maybe you can use that to your advantage. When equipped, this trope increases the likelihood for success of plans of attack that antagonize the enemy, even if they are not enough for the kill. Upon successful activation, the enemy will predictably become enraged and lash out, but their savvy will be debuffed proportionately. If used by a strategist scholar, the enemy will reliably be drawn into a prep-launch chase scene if plausible. You think you're smart, huh? Well, you had better be right. Kimberly was drained from getting killed for the second time. Even though her body was healed, she still moved her hand to her throat as if subconsciously assuring herself that a ghostly hand wasn't grasping it. When we all circled around and showed off our new tickets, Kimberly had 2 stat tickets, 2 tropes, and the same license as the rest of us. She did well with the limited amount of time she had before dying. Typecast. Type, buff. Archetype, eye candy. Aspect, celebrity. Stat used, moxie. Some actors play the same character over and over again so often that the fans will come just to see them play that same character in a new way. The creepy neighbor, the desperate lover, the guy down on his luck, all of these and more can be expected, nay, demanded when certain actors are cast in a movie. When using this trope, the player will be able to get away with certain actions or situations with less setup than they normally require because the audience has come to expect the performance. Buff set UPS that the player has a pattern of doing from storyline to storyline. Better hope you aren't typecast for dying. This was a potentially game-saving trope. For storylines like the one we had just completed where there wasn't much time for organic setup, it would be useful to use the audience's expectations to help us. Kimberly played the slain lover. I had a feeling that the audience would see that a lot. Ellipses. Type, perk/action. Archetype, any. Aspect. Stat used. In many movies and television shows, characters will have a conversation that only includes a few lines of dialogue, but it appears they are pausing in between those lines to get to a new location before continuing. When this trope is equipped, the player will be able to send the entire film off-screen during the party phase and temporarily prevent continuity from moving forward by simply stopping an expositional conversation and not continuing it until in a different setting. This can create time for collaboration, planning, or rest. Be warned, players ought not move the story forward or do non-incidental exploration while off-screen or the story will start back up. Remember, we won't finish this conversation until we get to school. This could help stretch the party phase out a bit and give us some breathing room. I liked it. Dina got 1 stat ticket, but 3 tropes. Her performance was likely lacking, given that the subplot with her son was just dropped. She also got the license. They ruined the shot. Type, rule/perk. Archetype, outsider. Aspect, stranger. Stat used, hustle. It can be difficult to stay out of view of the camera. Sometimes, an entire shot gets ruined because someone who wasn't supposed to be in frame accidentally was. When this trope is equipped, if the player is visible in shot when they are attempting to hide off screen, they will get a notification on the red wallpaper. Once they are out of frame, the original scene will be reshot. While characters in the scene will not realize they are repeating the scene, those outside of it will. The content of the scene cannot be changed, however, those outside of it can act differently than they originally did. Carousel gets a better shot, you get a mulligan. Everyone wins. Just don't take advantage, okay? When Dina showed us this trope, I could see a flash of embarrassment on her face. She had accidentally slipped up and found herself in a shot. She didn't say much about it, but later as I watched the storyline over again on the red wallpaper, I noticed that in the scene where Isaac was getting his scalp almost ripped off, Dina was casually leaning against a tree in the background watching. Her character was supposed to have been lost in the woods at that moment. Dark secret. Type, rule/insight. Archetype, outsider. Aspect, stranger. Stat used, moxie. Some characters have a connection to the story that isn't clear at first. As the story unfolds, the sinister nature of that connection will come back to bite them. With this trope equipped, the player will be given a backstory that ties them into the conflict of the storyline, often having a pivotal role in the evil or having unspoken incentives. The player will get a very limited peek at their character's involvement on the script, but they must discover along with the audience exactly how dark their involvement is. Once the secret is revealed, the player's plot armor drops to zero until the protagonists have played out the shock and reconciliation beats of their arcs and resolve to work together. The odds on reconciliation happening before the player is pushing up daisies are not high. This was the same trope the stranger had equipped. It was useful, but repetitive. It would also involve Dina taking a more hands-on role. We would have to experiment with it. Light fingers. Type, buff. Archetype, outsider. Aspect, criminal. Stat used, hustle. Some characters have a light touch that enables them to take things that don't belong to them without getting caught. With hands aided in speed by movie magic, the character can take just about anything into their possession if it's just laying there for the taking. When equipped, this trope buffs the player's attempts to steal objects on screen without even the audience noticing. Better reconsider doing this too often. For when you just can't wait until the storyline is over to pilfer from the set. P.S. Have fun listening to the tape. Dina passed around this ticket and watched as we got to that last line. I spent the whole time wondering what it was that Dina had stolen. What tape had she taken? And it hit me right as she pulled it out of her purse. It was the tape from the cassette player in the black carriage that brought us to town. I had noticed the tape was missing, but this was Carousel. For all I knew, there was no tape to begin with. No. There was a tape. Dina had taken it without anyone but Carousel itself noticing. She held it out to us. I thought it was worth a shot, she said sheepishly. I reached into my hoodie pocket and retrieved my tape player. Constance started laughing when she saw what was going on. I don't recall seeing a player do that, she said. Will it work? Dina asked. Constance shrugged. It just might, she said. Dina was living up to her outsider archetype. Now she could break out of handcuffs and steal things for us. We continued showing off our new tropes. Bobby had been to the resort kitchens again and raided them. We were all equal parts tired and hungry. We devoured the entire room service menu, most of which was deep-fried or microwaved, but it didn't bother us. The cooks are already here to start breakfast, Bobby said. If you want something made by actual cooks. He showed us his winnings. 3 tropes and 2 stat tickets. He did far more than he was required to. Actually, I'm a veterinarian. Type, background. Archetype. Aspect. Stat used. The player has a collection of skills gathered from their training as an animal doctor. In a medical emergency, you could do far worse. The player may equip the following tropes. Fluent in medical jargon, doctor. Animal whisperer, adventurer. If you can't see it, it won't bleed, soldier. This is for the pain. Doctor. Always the right dose, doctor. This was the same background trope that Valerie had on the grotesque storyline. It was pretty good stuff if you needed a healer. Bobby was interested in a different aspect though. He immediately realized that this background might allow him to one day get his dogs from back at the bed and breakfast. If he incorporated his animal background into stories, he might be able to get whatever tickets it was that allowed animal companions, assuming, as he did, that such things exist. It was nice to see him excited about something. It was nice to see him distracted. If you can't see it, it won't bleed. Type, healing. Archetype, soldier. Aspect, GI. Stat used, Moxie. Battle triage in movies is an inexact science. Just wrap the wound like you know what you're doing and carry on. Does anyone have a sulfur pack? When equipped, the player will be able to temporarily ease the debilitation of an injury by dressing the wound and covering the audience's view of it. The injury will resurface constantly until real medical care is given. At some point, the injured get left behind. Temporarily treats the hobbled, mutilated, and incapacitated statuses. Does not work if the audience has seen the extent of the injuries. Counterintuitively, wounds often bleed so badly it's hard to tell how severe they are. This trope was useful as I recalled, but it was largely supported by the other tropes Valerie had. Those pain-relieving M&Ms were a lifesaver. I wondered what this trope was like when your pain wasn't blocked. Remember me? Type, action. Archetype, wallflower. Aspect, recast. Stat used, Moxie. Even bit characters can inject themselves into a narrative and make a memorable interaction if they can establish a shared history with the main character. With this trope equipped, the player can promote themselves from a nameless background character to a proper part of the main cast before Second Blood. If successful, the player can be treated as more significant by the story even if they have been recast into a less significant role. Be warned, this will inhibit many useful wallflower tropes that rely on being ignored by the narrative in exchange for greater agency within the plot. Remember me? From Carousel High? We sat next to each other in biology class. In case we needed Bobby to be more than some guy who happens to show up, he could now be a full player even when cast as a background character. I needed to read up on what the nuances were of how different character classifications were treated in the story. Isaac was hesitant to press the big red button. He probably regretted pushing it the first time, as we all did. When he pressed it, he got 2 stat tickets, 2 tropes, and, of course, the license. His first storyline was way over-leveled for him. He didn't do much but get injured and dragged to the world of the dead, but his contribution was enough. Blood Loss Delirium. Type, perk. Archetype, comedian. Aspect, stooge. Stat used, Moxie. It can be hard to lighten the mood when people start dying. You just can't make jokes when people are dying. But maybe if the character is a little woozy, a little lightheaded from blood loss, that could give them the cover they need to cut through the tension. When this trope is equipped, the player will feel the positive effects of blood loss, the drunken-like stupor and lightheadedness, instead of pain. This trope also provides cover to allow jokes in scenes that might otherwise not allow them because of the seriousness of the situation. The symptoms will get more severe the closer the player is to death. Oh God, he's lost a lot of blood. No, he's always like this. He sure earned this one. Gallows humor. Type, perk/healing. Archetype, comedian. Aspect, cynic. Stat used, savvy. Sometimes it is difficult to deal with dark subjects. Making light of it may be the only way through. When equipped, the player can make dark jokes to ease their own mental pain after a terrible event and clear their head so they can think. If done well, they can ease the mental pain of present allies as well. This trope can also temporarily ease physical pain or even heal unseen injuries, but effects will vary. The cleverness of the joke will determine effectiveness. They say laughter is the best medicine. How good of medicine is an inappropriate chuckle? If we could get him comfortable doing his job as comedian, he might do us a lot of good. Cassie was in bad shape from her first death, but with encouragement from Isaac, she pushed the button and reaped her rewards. She got 3 stat tickets and 2 tropes. Not bad at all. Helping Kimberly debuff Strander Blake was no small feat. Reflective jump scare. Type, insight. Archetype, psychic. Aspect, seer. Stat used, Moxie. The character walks into the bathroom and glances up at the mirror. Ah! Someone is in the reflection, but when they turn to look, No one is there. Spooky. With this trope equipped, the player will be able to get a quick glimpse of the enemy when they glance into a mirror or other reflective surface. They will not have identities revealed but can still see important information. Be prepared because it will be gone in a flash. In non-supernatural stories, this ability might manifest in less useful ways. He's standing right behind you. Useful. I hope Cassie was okay with jump scares. Foreboding signs. Type, insight. Archetype, psychic. Aspect, occultist. Stat used, savvy. Death leaves its fingerprints that can only be seen by characters who look closely. The player will be alerted to supernatural signs of who will be the next target in the storyline with hints of how the attack will happen. Drawing attention to these signs on screen will seal the target's fate in a supernatural storyline. Pointing these signs out can create great narrative footing for character arcs for highly skilled characters. You're just superstitious, reading into things. Psychics really did bring the hits. Finally, it was Antoine's turn to show us what he had earned. 1 stat ticket, the license, and 2 tropes. He held 1 trope in his hand for a moment before Kimberly took it from him and read it to herself. She handed it back to him and said, "It's a trope to help him suppress his fear and stress." He quickly pocketed it. His other trope wasn't as controversial. Off the bench. Type, perk/buff. Archetype, athlete. Aspect, sport. Stat used, grit. When a character has missed scenes that involve trauma or injury, they can enter future scenes untarnished by what came before. When equipped, the player will feel rested for every consecutive scene that they are not in. If they are off-screen long enough while the film continues elsewhere, they can even get buffed in hustle and moxie. The enemy just chewed through the other characters. Now it's your turn. It looked like Antoine was getting lots of perks. And what else? Priority number 1, get away from the haunted hotel room. We knew that technically our odds of something bad happening were low, but this was the place where Cassie's body had laid cold for over an hour. This was not a place we could sleep comfortably if we could avoid it. There were broken windows and some shredded wallpaper. "You can come to my place," Sydney offered. "My dad will make you some scrambled eggs." "Your dad?" I asked. "You don't mean?" She understood what I was asking. "No," she said. "God no. The stranger isn't my real dad. That was just for the story." She and Constance shared a giggle. "Your real dad is here?" Kimberly asked. Sydney nodded. "Dad, stepmother, and her son. The whole family. That was part of the deal. I figured that Constance would invite us to her house because that was so close, but it turned out that place belonged to some random NPC from a story about mind-controlling leeches. She just took it over for our storyline." As we walked through the night, Cassie and Isaac walked solemnly. Antoine had Kimberly wrapped in his arms. Dina trailed behind. Bobby wanted to talk. "You notice how the now playing board calls that story a reboot of Reply the Departed?" Indeed it had. The through line. The centennial celebration. Reply the Departed, reboot. I also noticed that the section on that board for bonus material had gained another bonus. Secrets of Carousel number 6, The Dark Water. That told me that Reply the Departed had secret lore or something similar. If I were to guess, it had something to do with the Blue Lantern ghost. Even as we walked through the darkness, I still wanted to go find that lantern. Magic was strange. "I can't wait to listen to that tape," Bobby continued. "It might give us a jump start on solving the through line. One step closer to figuring this whole thing out." The tape detailing the history of Carousel that Dina had stolen from the carriage that brought us to town was still unplayed. We didn't want to listen to it while still at the hotel. Constance, who was not very far ahead of us, said, "You might take Carousel's warning on that." "What warning?" Bobby asked. "When Carousel makes a point to mention something like that, that's a warning," Sydney said. Constance nodded her head. "Yes," she said. "I would wait until you completed the Centennial storylines at least. Wouldn't want to steal Carousel's thunder, or you might also get the lightning." Sydney and Constance laughed together as fast friends. "Is everything on the tickets a threat?" Antoine asked. "I'm sure not everything is a threat. You must consider the context," Constance said. Antoine and Kimberly looked at each other. The walk was about 25 minutes until we got to a house in a nice neighborhood with big lots and multiple stories. They each had nice gardens and automatic sprinklers. "There it is," Sydney said, pointing to a house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was the type of house you might wish you had grown up in. "This is actually the cul-de-sac I grew up in," Sydney said. "They've got NPCs in them of course, but the houses were from my world." She led us up the driveway to the front door. She took out a key and started fitting it into the lock. Before she could, the door was opened and a man in a t-shirt and pajama pants opened the door. He was slightly balding. He looked like any random dad. "Sydney, do you have any idea what time it is?" he asked. "You had us worried sick." "I tried to call, but my phone wasn't working," Sydney said. "I was at the library helping Ms. Barlow with an exhibit for the centennial tomorrow. I promise." The red wallpaper called her dad Ross Martin, worried father. He was level 3. Nothing out of the ordinary. His eyes shot toward Constance. "Oh," he said. "I wasn't aware you needed her tonight, Constance." "She did try to call, Ross," Constance said. "Oh," Ross said, "still. I don't like not knowing where you are. After what happened before, you know. We moved to Carousel so I didn't have to worry about you, you know." Sydney hugged her father and gave him a kiss on the cheek. "That stuff is long behind us, Dad," she said. How old, exactly, was Sydney supposed to be? That was the question I was asking. Her age was so ambiguous. I thought she was our age, maybe older, but now I was wondering if she was a teenager. "And these are," he asked. "My friends. They helped on the project." "Ah," he said. Then he looked at us. "If you're going to stay, just keep it quiet. You guys like scrambled eggs?" "Sure do," Bobby said. Ross waved us in. The house was beautiful. The living room was filled with comfortable furniture. We all piled in and laid out, exhausted. Sydney's stepmother, Tawny, was in the living room and greeted us enthusiastically. "You're Sydney's friends? I'm so glad to meet you. She never lets us meet her friends. Let me get you some drinks." She was awfully chipper for 5 in the morning. "You moved to Carousel so he didn't have to worry about you?" Isaac asked. That was the first thing he had said in a while. Sydney fake chuckled and said, "Yeah. I had some run-ins with evil. First when I was 16, then again every few years until I was in my mid-30s and it was going to kill my daughter. I got a deal to save her. They made my life into 6 storylines. That's almost a record here. Dad doesn't get killed until the 3rd one." "Does he know about all of this?" Dina asked. Sydney shook her head. "He is blissfully unaware. Thinks the first storyline happened before we moved here. Really it's just on the other side of town. He's happy most of the time." "What do you mean when you say you took a deal?" I asked. Samantha said something similar. In fact, she had taken the deal to save her dad, as I understand it. Some mysterious man arrived and offered me a deal. Just that simple. He said he was fascinated by my story. Said he had a place for me where my daughter would be safe, where I'd get to see my father again. Mind you, the whole time, everything is moving in slow motion. My daughter was screaming. My house was burning. I had lost. I usually won in the end. He just needed me to say yes. That's what I did. There's more information somewhere in my script, but I can't find it. They don't like to be brought into the story like this." Sydney got a look of sadness on her face. I couldn't help but notice that her daughter was nowhere to be seen. Constance appeared to sense that Sydney was done talking too because she turned to us and said, "You chose me because you thought I might have some information for you." "Indeed, I do." "Ask it quickly. I have a schedule to keep." Antoine and I looked at each other. We hadn't had time to come up with a list of questions. What are we supposed to be doing here? The through line is the main goal, right? We have to finish the through line to leave, right? How does secret lore play in? Constance thought for a moment. Carousel considers knowledge to be power. Knowing certain things is all it takes to move forward in the narrative, more or less, for better or for worse. I will give you some knowledge. Okay, I said. I could talk for hours about Carousel, but I would be talking in circles. Its beginning, its purpose, All things you will learn in due time, I hope. When you do, I hope you will tell me about it. I regret that my role in this world is as a bit player. I regret that I cannot help you in any real way. I regret translating that damn book. She looked at me. You may want to write this down. I grabbed the Carousel atlas from Antoine's bag and a pen from Dina so I could write things down. Even then, there was a lot to write down. I turned to a blank page and started to write what Constance told us. It was lifetimes ago, she said. I was sitting in my study deciphering that book I ought not have touched. My regret for my hubris in those days is immense. I remember everything that happened after that, she continued after a pause, after I said those words. Thousands of people do not deserve to be imprisoned here in Carousel, but I am not one of them. The destruction I brought upon my world is unforgivable and I accept this life as my punishment. My world descended into darkness and nothingness until one day I woke from it, and I was here. I remember everything about that day, Constance mused, except for what it was we talked about. That part is kept from me, stricken from the script. It was Silas Durkin who brought me here, a strikingly handsome man with dark hair and dark eyes. He asked me something, and I can see his lips moving, and I can feel my lips moving in my memories, but the words aren't there. All gone. I wasn't able to give him the answers that he wanted, she admitted, but he was soon able to find someone who could. And the answer they gave him was to build the game at Carousel. You see, first there was nothing but darkness and mystery. Then there was a town called Carousel. Then there was a game. The purpose of all of it lies so far back in the past I cannot find it. I've spent my lifetimes looking for it, but not a scrap of paper or a whisper will reveal it. He put it just beyond my grasp. That is not my purpose. I think that is why he wants you here, Constance said to the listener. He wants you to know what happened, to be a part of it, to live through it or die, and he is willing to do whatever it takes to get someone to witness his obsession. Carousel was born from obsession. Most evil things are. Whether you are obsessed over life or death, you still end up in a horror movie. Isn't that how the saying goes? The game at Carousel tells the story of what happened before, she continued, but Carousel could not tell that story in a straightforward manner. No. It stitched together the pieces from worlds apart. It used the tools available. The game outlasted what came before, as far as I can tell, Constance said thoughtfully. Sydney was brought in at Carousel 1996. Tar was brought in at Carousel 1969. All of them, the Paragons, brought in at their own time and at the same time because the game at Carousel exists outside it all. I wonder if that was related to the question Silas asked me so many years ago, how to get outside of time. If so, he really did get his answer. Remember the darkness. Remember the founding. Remember the game, she urged. Finally, I want you to remember the moment that all that changed. At Carousel 1989, a simple story about a young woman and her father being held hostage by psychopaths was brought here. Not the best story, not special in any way. And yet when it was added to 1989, everything changed. Carousel became irrevocably intertwined with your world, Constance concluded. I don't know what he's planning. I hope that the insider knows what they're doing, but I doubt they could possibly anticipate the sheer force of will that they're dealing with. She thought for a moment. Learn everything you can during the through line. You must master it in order to understand what came before. Good luck. Sydney's stepmother came into the living room with some cups of ice and a pitcher of lemonade. Drinks, anyone? I'm afraid that I should be headed home, Constance said. I have lines today. Have to work the library's booth. I have a meeting with the mayor tonight. Good night, everyone.